In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, September 15th. South Korea's vice ministers of foreign affairs and defense are in Washington for the extended deterrence strategy and consultation group meeting amid a new law in North Korea that paves the path for a preemptive nuclear attack. And in capital Seoul, top Chinese legislator Li Zhanshu is leading a delegation here starting on this Thursday for a 3-day trip at the invitation of National Assembly Speaker Jinping. Meanwhile, cautious words of comfort from the World Health Organization with regard to COVID-19 as its head says the end of the pandemic is in sight, but the world must remain vigilant until the end. The country's daily COVID-19 tally has declined on this Thursday, just 24 hours after hitting close to 94,000. And in line with this drop, health authorities here are now urging flu vaccinations amid an early onslaught of influenza this year. Our Xinyan starts us off.
South Korea is still seeing tens of thousands of new COVID-19 cases each day. On Thursday, the country reported 71,471 new infections. Though this was a drop of more than 22,000 from a day earlier, authorities are still on high alert, mainly because the threat of a flu is re-emerging for the first time in 2 years. We've seen the highest flu count in September since 2018. For the past few years, only 1 out of 1,000 people went to see a doctor for the flu. Now, this number has jumped to 5 out of 1,000. That's why the government held a briefing on Thursday and shared its plans on how to fight off the flu. Officials stressed that though the situation is concerning, the country has know-how on treating influenza.
Because we've seen influenza every year, we have appropriate vaccines and treatments against it. So don't worry too much. Instead, we ask everyone to go get their vaccine shot when it's their turn.
Those at high risk will be able to get flu shots free of charge starting next Wednesday. The first in line will be infants who are at least 6 months old and children up to age 13 who've never had an influenza vaccine shot before. This group is being asked to receive 2 jabs. After them, pregnant women and seniors aged 65 and older will be eligible for their flu shot. Shinyoon, Arirang News.
South Korea's first Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Cho Hyun-dong has hinted that South Korea and the U.S. may enhance their extended deterrence strategy to better respond to evolving threats posed by North Korea. Speaking to reporters in Washington on Wednesday, the Vice Minister said the extent to which strategic assets are deployed may change, pointing to a new law by Pyongyang that paves the path for preemptive nuclear strikes. Cho's comments come ahead of the extended deterrence strategy and consultation group meeting scheduled for Friday, during which Cho and Vice Defense Minister Shin Bum-chul will discuss with their American counterparts ways to streamline their security response. According to the Foreign Ministry, Cho and Shin on Wednesday visited the U.S. Missile Defense Agency and were briefed on Washington's missile defense capabilities. China's top legislator, Li Zhanshu, arrives in Seoul late Thursday at the invitation of National Assembly Speaker Kim Jin-pyo. Li is scheduled to hold talks with Kim on Friday to discuss ways to boost cooperation between the two parliaments. Their meeting will be followed by a joint press briefing and a banquet in the evening. Now, China's third highest-ranking official is also expected to pay a courtesy call on President Yoon Suk-yeol during his 3-day trip here. Now, this is the first time China's top legislator has traveled to South Korea since the year 2015. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Uzbekistan to attend the 2-day Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, which brings together 8 member countries across Eurasia and begins on this Thursday. Also on the sidelines of this multilateral summit, Xi Jinping is slated to sit down with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for talks which Kremlin has described as being of particular importance. The two leaders are expected to address the war in Ukraine and other matters of mutual interest. Now, prior to his arrival in Uzbekistan, Xi Jinping was in Kazakhstan, Wednesday that is, for summit talks there as part of his first in-person diplomacy since the start of the pandemic. Over in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has acknowledged his soldiers' stunning counteroffensive against Russia since the start of September, resulting in the reclaiming of seized territory. Our Kim Jang-shil reports.
As of now, stabilization measures have been completed in districts with a total area of more than 4,000 square kilometers. Stabilization continues in the liberated territory of approximately the same size.
That adds up to 8,000 square kilometers of territory, which is 2,000 more than what President Zelenskyy said they'd retaken earlier this week. Ukrainian officials, though, say it's important to make a distinction between taking territory and ensuring it is totally safe. Meanwhile, world leaders are pressuring the Kremlin to end the war. On Tuesday, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin, urging him to completely withdraw his troops from Ukraine. According to a German government spokesperson, Chancellor Scholz stressed that any further Russian moves would not go unanswered and would not be recognized under any circumstances. The Chancellor urged the Russian president to find a diplomatic solution as soon as possible. U.S. President Joe Biden took a more cautious approach to Ukraine's recent advances. Asked whether Ukraine has reached a turning point in the war, Biden said this.
The question is unanswerable right now. It's hard to tell. It's clear the Ukrainians have made significant progress, but I think it's going to be a long haul.
Meanwhile, the IAEA said Tuesday that all 3 backup power lines to the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia have been restored over the past few days. There's been concern that the southeastern city in Ukraine, occupied by Russian troops since March, could be the scene of a nuclear disaster. As for the Ukrainian economy, there was some positive news Tuesday from the Wall Street Journal, which said that business is picking up again. It said that deliveries by Nova Posta Ukraine's equivalent of FedEx are back to 90% of their pre-war level, and there are more jobs listed on the country's biggest employment website, work.ua. It said Ukraine's recent counterattacks have created enough certainty for economic activity to resume in the parts of Ukraine not occupied by Russia. Kim Jang-shil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in the U.S., the producer price index rose 8.7% on year in August, but marked a retreat from the 9.8% rise posted in July. The Bureau of Labor Statistics on Wednesday linked the slower pace of growth to falling gas prices. This latest finding comes just a day after a worrying consumer price index report for August, which saw stocks tumble in the U.S. PPI tracks average changes in the prices paid to producers of goods and services. The European Commission has shared plans to raise $141 billion by imposing windfall taxes on energy companies that made abnormally high profits. The proposal includes measures to redirect the proceeds to households and businesses struggling to pay soaring energy bills. The Commission says it targets power companies that do not burn natural gas, the price of which has soared lately. It added other measures on fossil fuel users would follow suit. The proposals themselves will have to be approved by member states, who will meet later this month. There has been a cautious yet comforting outlook on COVID-19 by the global health body, as the number of pandemic-related fatalities worldwide last week was reportedly the lowest since March 2020. Our Arirang shares more on the comments by the WHO.
WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says the world has never been in a better position to end the COVID-19 pandemic, while calling on countries to keep up their efforts against a virus that has killed over 6 million people.
We have never been in a better position to end the pandemic. We're not there yet, but the end is in sight.
His comments on Wednesday come as newly reported cases of the disease fell to the lowest level since March 2020. In fact, according to the WHO's latest epidemiological report on COVID-19, the number of reported cases fell 12% during the week ending September 4th compared to a week earlier. However, Dr. Tedros stressed that the fight has not ended just yet and urged countries to seize this opportunity.
If we don't take this opportunity now, we run the risk of more variants, more deaths, more disruption, and more uncertainty. So let's seize this opportunity.
The WHO also warned that a drop in the number of reported cases is deceptive, as many countries have cut back on testing and may not be detecting less serious cases. According to the WHO's technical lead on COVID-19, Maria Van Kerkhove, there may be more virus cases than are being reported, cautioning that the virus is circulating at a very intense level around the world at the present time. With the number of COVID-19 infections during the pandemic surpassing 600 million cases worldwide, with some 6.4 million deaths, the WHO continues to outline plans to fully control the virus, including recommendations on vaccinating 100% of the most at-risk groups and to keep up testing and sequencing for the virus. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
That ends part one of the Daily Report. In part two, we delve into China's resumption of in-person diplomacy. Stay with us.
What matters?
Welcome back. Chinese President Xi Jinping has returned to the international diplomatic arena in person with his arrival on Wednesday in Kazakhstan. Now, this marks his first foreign trip since the start of the pandemic, and today, that is Thursday, he's poised to meet with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Uzbekistan on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. For more, I have Professor Chu Jae-woo from Kyung University. Professor, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Jeff Moon, the head of China Moon Strategies, that is, a consulting firm that Mr. Moon himself founded after serving as Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for China Affairs under the Obama administration. Mr. Moon, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Right, Professor Chu, we'll start here in the studio. Mr. Xi Jinping, as I mentioned, landed in Kazakhstan's capital of Nur-Sultan on Wednesday for talks with his counterpart Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Let's begin with a few words on the significance of Kazakhstan as the destination of his first foreign trip since the start of the pandemic.
Yes, it's been a while for Xi Jinping to travel abroad, and it was surprising that he decided to travel to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is really strategically important to China. It's one of the critical gateways to China's outreach to the world, especially in the region of Indian Ocean, South Asia, Central Asia, and so forth. And Kazakhstan is one of the countries that, China shares one of the longest border lines. And it's, I believe it is the second after, Russia. And it is a really critical gateway to Central Asia and Caspian Seas, and in terms of geoeconomic strategy perspective. And it is a gateway that extends its oil pipelines to these regions. And geopolitically speaking, also, we all know that Kazakhstan is adjacent to China's Xinjiang province, which is predominantly whose population is predominant by Muslims there, and it is a Muslim region there, and so China is really sensitive about the infiltration of Muslim coming from Central Asia and the Middle East and so forth, especially with fundamentalist Muslim activities penetrating into Xinjiang area and causing instability there. So China is really it keeps a close eyes on ties with Kazakhstan for these reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
And Mr. Moon, I believe the Belt and Road Initiative was unveiled in Kazakhstan in the year 2013. That being said, what are the prospects of this particular initiative amid the current climate of geopolitical events, if I may?
Well, China announced the Belt and Road Initiative both to expand its global economic reach and influence, and also to export China's economic overcapacity to other nations. So the initiative has achieved some successes in creating a Chinese finance global infrastructure and transportation, trade, and production networks. Unfortunately, however, the program has also financed many projects that were not viable, and loans were extended to underdeveloped countries like Sri Lanka, Laos, and Kenya that cannot repay. So that lending activity has reduced considerably in recent years, both because it was unsustainable and because it's unpopular in China, where citizens think the money should go to something else. So I expect this initiative to continue, but with a less ambitious agenda. I also wonder, frankly, given China's current real estate crisis, how long China can continue funding these unprofitable overseas projects when it desperately needs funds to keep its own real estate sector afloat.
Right, point well taken there. Professor Chu, later today, that is Thursday, as I mentioned at the start, Mr. Xi Jinping will sit down with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. That is, what do you suppose will be on the agenda of this particular summit? We've reported earlier on that Kremlin has said they'll address the war in Ukraine. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think that could be one new aspect to the summit. Agenda for this summit. There could be a whole lot of things. If we can take the past results of the bilateral summit, then it gets as extensive and expansive as you can imagine. It covers a broad range and a whole lot of issues that are concerned to the mutual interest of the two countries. It ranges from economic to security to social welfare and the people-to-people exchange and everything. Basically, it covers everything. It's really extensive, and there are a number of pages from for the joint summit statement too. But like you pointed out, I think the situation in Ukraine and Russia's stance and probably China's support could be also included, and that could be one new aspect that could be included in the joint statement coming out soon.
Right,
yeah.
but we'll have to probably wait and see for
That's
sure.
right.
Mr. Moon, the summit between these two leaders, as I mentioned, takes place on the sidelines of the two-day Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Could you tell us a bit about this particular summit? I mean, its purpose and perhaps its member states.
Sure. Well, the SCO was founded in 1996. Its headquarters is in Beijing, and it has a security focus. The original members were China, Russia, and a few Central Asian nations. It's been expanded. Iran, India, Pakistan, Mongolia joined around 2005 as observers. The U.S. applied to be an observer and was not admitted. More recently, Belarus, Turkey, Sri Lanka, and a few other countries have joined as dialogue partners. China's original interest in this organization was to join forces to combat uprisings in Xinjiang. So there is a permanent terrorism committee. The SCO members are sympathetic to authoritarianism, so they can be counted on to support China's activities in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, which are somewhat controversial. They also share China's opposition to Western governments, policies, and alliances. During the past decade, they've held some joint military exercises. They've also had some economic and cultural programs. So China, ironically, strongly supports the SCO and other alliances that it leads, but it claims that alliances that it does not lead are hegemonistic and a danger to its neighbors, including alliances between the Republic of Korea and the United States, for example.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor
Yes.
Chu, China's top legislator Li Zhanshu is leading a delegation here in South Korea. Now, before we touch upon his agenda here, could you tell us a bit about him?
Yes, he's a well-known figure in Chinese politics. He's obviously chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, which is equivalent to Korea's National Assembly, and in America he could be dubbed as Chinese speaker. And in the power ranking of the Chinese Communist Party, he ranks third in the Politburo Standing Committee there. But he's also, well-aged. He's over the limit of the, age limit. So I don't think he could be elected as a chairman again coming this, Chinese Communist Party Congress in October. So he's scheduled to retire next month. So, but he's still an influential figure.
Trip here to South Korea and perhaps its broader implications.
Well, when Li visited Vladivostok during the first week of September, he gave a speech emphasizing general themes like trade, energy, technology, and culture. He also told Russian officials that his government wanted to deepen legislative cooperation on countering foreign influence and countering sanctions. So I suspect some of these subjects may come up, but there are also several issues that are unique to the China-South Korea relationship. China frequently uses both carrots and sticks in dealing with other countries. China wants South Korean technology and semiconductors and other areas, so I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't offer some carrots in the form of economic opportunities in technology fields. At the same time, he may use some sticks in the form of threats designed to split South Korea from its allies. China has threatened and sanctioned South Korea in the past for cooperating with the United States on military and other matters. So he might very well return to the old playbook and extend that attitude to new initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the CHIPS Alliance. But the big picture is that China and Chinese leaders have not been traveling overseas, and this is a resumption of Chinese diplomacy overseas in the form of the #3 leader coming to the Republic of Korea.
Right, it is. And also, Professor Xu, there is talk that Li Zhanshu and with his meetings with officials here, it might result in perhaps a possible summit between President Yoon Suk-yeol and Chinese President Xi Jinping. What are the prospects of such a summit, do you think, perhaps within the year?
Within a year. Okay, Sonny, you ask me every time I come up to this show.
I do. It's a frequent question.
Yes, and my answer hasn't changed yet. Within a year, I don't think he'll come. Yeah, unless there's a breakthrough over THAAD, which is holding the summit back. So my take is as long as, this THAAD issue remains as thorny as it is now, there's no reason for Xi Jinping to come and visit South Korea. And like I said before, once he touchdowns in Seoul, then that means that issue has been resolved completely. So there's a really strong message politically there. So so it is really meaningful for Xi Jinping to land his feet on Seoul soil.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking about President Xi Jinping, Mr. Moon, his absence, his physical absence, that is, from the diplomatic scene over the past some 1,000 days, given the start of the pandemic, of course, do you suppose this absence has had an impact on perhaps Beijing's standing on the international arena?
I think it really has. I think international travel gives national leaders an opportunity both to spread their message, but also to hear messages from foreign counterparts. In the 2.5 years since Xi last traveled overseas, a lot has happened. China's support for Ukraine, for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has costed friendships around the world. The results of China's vaccine diplomacy have been extremely disappointing. In the meantime, the U.S. has repaired its relationships with a variety of allies, especially in Europe. Other countries are recovering from COVID while China is still in a lockdown. And international approval of China, according to various polls, is at all-time lows, including in the Republic of Korea. I think that China's sinking international image is due, at least in part, to the inability of its leadership to comprehend how its actions and policies are perceived overseas. So getting out, seeing the world outside of China, and listening closely to what others have to say is very important for Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders.
Right, of course it is. Professor Zhu, how, in the meantime, should South Korea, I believe I've asked you this quite frequently as well, how should South Korea, under President Yoon Suk-yeol, seek to balance its security ties with the U.S. and economic ties with China as these two powerhouses continue their standoff?
Yes, since then, a lot of things have changed, and I don't think we can really separate the two now. I think we'd have to be really more clear on, leaning towards one side over the other, because with the, start of IPEF and Indo-Pacific strategy and Chip 4 and other things, right? They're on the verge of materializing. And so therefore, Yoon Suk-yeol government, since he declared that he's going to be more cooperative and strengthening the alliance relationship with the United States, implying that he's going to take side with the United States. And I think that's the right choice, because we have to understand where these two countries want to go, and they're going to go on their separate way. It's obvious that once they're going to take their own separate way, we have to make a choice. So the situation is different from the past. So therefore, I think Yoon Suk-yeol government, by choosing the United States, and if it is the case, then we have to understand the intent and the purposes of the United States strategy here, and that is to manage, if not control, the China. And I think by doing that, we can also share the profits and privileges of the United States-led initiatives here. And on the bilateral level, however, we would have to also, by utilizing these U.S.-led initiatives, we should apply that in our relationship with China and try to manage China's some coercive measures that we put against us.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Moon, I understand this next question may be quite tough, if not sensitive, of course. We're keeping in mind Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What are the chances, do you suppose, of a similar scenario here in Asia, especially given China's stance on Taiwan?
I think a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is very unlikely in the near term, because Xi Jinping's priority is getting reelected at the upcoming Party Congress with nothing getting in the way. Over the longer term, I think the likelihood increases. Results depend on the type of attack that's being launched. A quarantine designed to get Taiwan to just surrender preemptively would have a different impact than a full-scale invasion, which would require troops to cross the Taiwan Straits. But the cost in any event would be extremely high. We know Taiwan's citizens will not accept Chinese rule willingly. There could be a tremendous loss of life. There will be enormous economic disruption, not just in the region, but perhaps globally. Military conflict could continue indefinitely. And China's relationship with the world and the leading nations of the world would never be the same ever again. And what China's invasion, like the Russian invasion, is sour. Can a China that has not fought a war in more than 40 years be sure an attack in Taiwan would go well? I think Xi Jinping will be wise enough to restrain the impulse to launch an invasion, and that, frankly, the biggest risk of a conflict is an unintentional military accident that escalates too quickly for leaders to control it.
Right. Hopefully he's listening to you as well, Mr. Moon. Thank you so much for your words. They're reassuring nonetheless, of course. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts, Mr. Moon. And Professor Chu here in the studio. As always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
South Korea has fined Google and Meta, which runs Facebook and Instagram, a combined total of 100 billion won, about $72 million for tracking consumers' online activities without their approval and using related information for targeted advertisements. Our Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea has taken strong action against two tech giants, Google and parent company of Facebook, Meta. The Personal Information Protection Commission, or PIPC, said Wednesday that it's fined Google around $50 million and Meta $22 million for violating local privacy laws.
It has been confirmed that Google and Meta have been violating the law by collecting and analyzing users' personal information to personalize online advertisements without their consent or clearly informing them.
Google has been collecting personal data through its default settings for users to give consent for at least 6 years since 2016. In case of Meta, it has not informed or obtained permission from users for the last 4 years. As a result, over 82% of Google users and over 98% of Meta users in South Korea have been unknowingly allowing the platforms to collect their information. At 100 billion Korean won, or around $72 million in total, the penalties are the biggest the regulator has ever issued for privacy violations. The PIPC also ordered the tech giants to clearly inform users when their information is being collected and used, and to obtain their consent in a way that enables them to exercise their right to privacy. Responding to the fine, Google said it will further discuss user privacy in South Korea with the Commission. On the other hand, Meta said it disagrees with the decision and is open to all options, including taking the issue to court. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The EU's General Court has upheld an antitrust ruling against Google, but it has reduced the fine to roughly $4.1 billion, down from the original $4.3 billion. The court on Wednesday said Google imposed unlawful restrictions on manufacturers of Android devices and mobile network operators to boost its search engine, that is. This is a record fine for an antitrust violation and the second court defeat for Google, which lost its challenge to a smaller but yet a multi-billion-dollar fine last year. SK Broadband and Netflix remain entangled in a battle over network usage fees. Well, lawmakers here are seeking to address the matter following last year's ruling by a South Korean court in favor of SK Broadband. Our Kim Do-yeon has details.
A draft of a bill for imposing network usage fees on foreign content providers may be picking up speed, as the National Assembly's Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee is set to hold a public hearing on the issue next Tuesday. This will be the first hearing on the topic, despite 7 different lawmakers from both sides of the aisle already having made proposals to hold foreign content providers, such as Netflix and Google, responsible for massive network load. Industry scholars and insiders are expected to be in attendance, and while efforts are being made, it isn't confirmed whether or not the two companies that started this discussion will be there, SK Broadband and Netflix. The issue of a network usage fee received global attention in 2019 as SK Broadband asked a court to hold Netflix responsible for the amount of traffic caused by the company, which resulted in increased infrastructure costs for SK. In 2020, Netflix accounted for nearly 5% of all internet traffic in South Korea, more than the top 3 Korean content providers, Naver, Kakao, and Wave combined. And they are responsible as local companies to pay a certain amount to internet providers. In June 2021, the court ruled that Netflix must discuss the issue of compensation for SK Broadband. However, the court were unable to set the specific amount to be paid. Because no practical advancements were made after the ruling, lawmakers took it into their own hands to resolve the situation by passing a law. Netflix has been claiming that this goes against the global idea of net neutrality and that it has its own infrastructure to better accommodate users in terms of delivering content. In fact, if such law to hold, content providers responsible for helping in providing internet to consumers actually passes, it would be a world first, setting precedent for other countries. And the complaint is not limited to just South Korea. ISPs in Europe have also been calling for such a law. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the number of 5G subscribers here in South Korea has exceeded 25 million since the start of the service in April 2019. According to the Ministry of Science and ICT on Thursday, there were 25.1 million 5G lines as of the end of July. While 5G subscribers accounted for a third of mobile communication subscription lines, it accounted for over 72% of total traffic. 4G and LTE accounted for over 62% of all users, with slightly over a quarter of the total traffic. 5G devices include not just mobile phones, but also tablet PCs, smartwatches, and smart cars. The proportion of female executives at South Korea's 500 biggest conglomerates has topped 6% for the first time. A survey of 353 of the conglomerates by the Women in Innovation and Leaders Index found women made up 6.3% of executive positions, an on-year increase of 0.8 percentage points. The data is part of South Korea's Gender Equality Index, which measures 6 dimensions, including wages and employment. The overall index came to 56.7 points, 4.8 points higher than last year. On the medical front, the health benefits of red ginseng have long been touted here in this part of the world. Well, now new research shows red ginseng also delays the progression of HIV infection into AIDS. Our Arirang explains.
AIDS is the late stage of an HIV infection that severely damages the immune system. This virus attack weakens the body to the point where even fighting a cold becomes difficult. But this doesn't happen immediately after infection. When a person is first infected with HIV, it remains as an R5 virus with low toxicity. If left untreated, as the infection progresses, the virus turns into a highly toxic X4 virus. From this point, the infected cells start to fuse with surrounding healthy cells, and the high toxicity of the virus causes the number of immune cells to decrease sharply, worsening the condition of the patient very quickly. A research team at the Asan Medical Center revealed observation data for 146 AIDS patients over the last 10 years, of which 58 patients were given 5.4 grams of red ginseng every day, and compared to 88 who weren't. The results showed that HIV toxicity remained low in the R5 virus for almost 3 times longer in patients who took the red ginseng. In these patients, the progress of the R5 virus turning into the highly toxic X4 virus also took 3.46 times longer than for patients who didn't take any red ginseng. This means taking the traditional herb can help patients with AIDS survive for longer.
We've been able to confirm that it slows the progression of the virus into its toxic pathogenic stage. This suggests that red ginseng suppresses the spread of the virus, slowing down the rate of immune cell decline.
The research team drew the analysis that red ginseng has various medicinal substances that enhance the body's immunity and antiviral capabilities. The results of the study were presented at the 29th Federation Meeting of Korean Basic Medical Scientists 2022 and also published in the international academic journal of Ginseng Research. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Sweden, the sitting prime minister has conceded election defeat. Sweden's incumbent PM Magdalena Andersson admitted election defeat to the right-wing opposition bloc on Wednesday, local time. The election was held Sunday and saw razor-thin margins between the left and right coalitions. The announcement now comes as early votes and those cast from abroad have also been counted, handing the opposition coalition a 3-seat majority in parliament. While some votes still need to be counted, the remaining ballots are unlikely to change the results. Sweden's next prime minister is likely to be Ulf Kristersson, the head of the moderate party. The right-wing bloc consists of 4 parties, including the far-right Sweden Democrats. The voter issues in this election were related to Europe's energy crisis, inflation, crime, and immigration. Millions of residents along the coast of China are preparing themselves for heavy rains, gale-force winds, and floods. This comes as Typhoon Muifa made landfall in the eastern Chinese port city of Zhoushan on Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. local time. In preparation for the typhoon, Zhejiang province closed schools, evacuated tourists from local islands, and called all nearby ships into port. Muifa is this season's 12th typhoon and is now bound for Shanghai. At the time of its arrival, Chinese authorities classified it as a strong typhoon, the second highest in the country's tropical cyclone classification system. It is also the most powerful tropical cyclone to impact the Yangtze River Delta in over 10 years. Argentina's monthly inflation rate in August has surged past 7%. The higher-than-anticipated figure means that Argentina's inflation over the last 12 months has reached 78.5%, one of the world's highest levels. The data released on Wednesday showed August's inflation rate was down slightly from July, but was still 0.4% higher than originally expected. A poll by Argentina's central bank saw local economists estimate that the country could see annual inflation climb to 95% by the end of the year. It comes as the nation grapples with skyrocketing consumer prices amid a debt and currency crisis. And finally, Dutch students from Eindhoven University of Technology have created what could be the world's most sustainable all-electric car. Called ZEM, or Zero Emission Mobility, the sporty 2-seater is able to capture more carbon than it emits. It does this by using 2 filters capable of taking in 2 kilograms of CO2 over 32,000 kilometers of driving. The car was designed to minimize carbon dioxide emissions throughout its lifespan. Most parts of the car are made using recycled plastics that have been 3D printed. The vehicle was also designed to be easily separated and recycled at the end of its use. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Thursday afternoon. You might be confused about what to wear today. While Seoul and Daejeon are reaching 30 degrees, it's rather cooler in eastern regions. But temperatures will rapidly cool down in the evening, so always pack a light jacket. Meanwhile, Jeju has to brace for up to 50 millimeters of rain until tomorrow, and strong winds with speeds of up to 70 kilometers per hour, which is as strong as a typhoon, will hit Jeju and the south coast. And there's a high wave advisory too. Please avoid dangerous areas and firmly secure your outdoor furniture. And the 14th typhoon of the season, Nanmadol, is predicted to hit mainland of Japan instead of South Korea. But still, Jeju and the south coast will be indirectly affected by the typhoon, so always keep an eye out for weather alerts. And the typhoon can still be a key factor for next week's weather with above average temperatures for a while. So it's not time to let your guard down just yet. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
On that note, we say goodbye. We'll be back with more coverage tomorrow. That is Friday. See you then. Thank you for now.
We cut down on single-use products, car emissions, and energy to protect the environment. But there is one more thing we should reduce. It's none other